Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The moon of Zephyra was a wasteland of jagged rocks and sulfurous air. Its twin suns cast an eerie amber glow over the surface, accentuating the craters left by centuries of meteor impacts and, more recently, the scars of relentless warfare. Corporal Elena Maris crouched behind a boulder, her pulse rifle cradled in her arms, the faint hum of its charge ready for discharge. The battle raged on around her, a cacophony of screams, gunfire, and the thunderous booms of collapsing vehicles. "Keep moving, Maris." Sergeant Cal's voice crackled over her comm. "We're pushing toward the Krylox dropships. No time to linger." Elena glanced over her shoulder at her retreating squad, their forms fading into the smoky horizon. The Krylox Confederacy was in full retreat, their forces scattered and broken. She should have been relieved, maybe even triumphant. Instead, a strange unease settled in her chest. The eerie sound of silence caught her attention. In this pocket of the battlefield, the chaos seemed to subside. She moved cautiously, scanning her surroundings. The ground was littered with the dead and dying humans and Krylox alike. Broken machinery sparked feebly, their artificial intelligence systems long since abandoned by the living. Then, she heard a low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a groan. Elena spun toward the noise, her rifle raised. Her eyes landed on the source, a Krylox warrior pinned beneath a large fragment of metal debris. He was enormous, even by Krylox standards, with a sleek exoskeleton that shimmered in the dim light. His chest heaved with labored breaths, and one of his elongated arms twitched feebly as if trying to claw his way free. A deep gash ran along his side, and a faint blue ichor seeped into the dirt around him. Elena froze. Her training screamed at her to pull the trigger. The Krylox were the enemy, after all. But as she stood there, weapon aimed, she hesitated. There was something about the alien's eyes. They weren't filled with rage or defiance, just pain and a strange, quiet acceptance. He growled something in his native tongue, a complex series of clicks and hisses that her translator implant couldn't fully parse. She hesitated again, then activated the device. "Do it," the translator finally supplied. "End it." Elena's grip on her rifle tightened. "What?" "You are Alliance," the alien rasped, his voice like gravel. "Do what your kind always does. Kill, and move on." The word struck Elena harder than any blow she'd taken in combat. She looked around, as if expecting someone to appear and tell her what to do. But there was no one. Her squad was gone, the battlefield nearly abandoned. It was just her and this enemy soldier. She lowered her weapon. "Not today," she muttered. The Krylox's yellow eyes narrowed in confusion. Before he could speak, Elena dropped her rifle and approached cautiously. The shard of metal pinning him looked heavy, but not immovable. She braced herself and began to push. The alien grunted in pain, his mandibles clicking involuntarily as she worked to free him. The shard shifted slightly, and with a final heave, she managed to dislodge it. The Krylox let out a strangled cry of relief, though he remained motionless. His lower body was clearly paralyzed, and the wounds on his torso oozed faintly glowing ichor. "You're not going anywhere like this," Elena said, half to herself. She glanced around for supplies, spotting a discarded first aid kit near a fallen Alliance medic. Grabbing it, she returned to the alien's side and began applying a sterile sealant to his wounds. The Krylox watched her in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his tone softer this time. "Why?" Elena paused, her hand stained with blue ichor. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm not leaving you here to die." The alien let out a low, rumbling sound that might have been a laugh or maybe a scoff. "Your kind will see you as traitor." "Maybe," she said, tightening the bandage. "But I'll deal with that later." As the distant sound of engines approached, likely a search party from one side or the other, Elena made a decision. She hefted the Krylox onto her shoulders, grunting under his weight. He didn't resist, though his mandibles clicked in what sounded like disbelief. "Hang on," she said, trudging toward the faint outline of an abandoned outpost she'd spotted earlier. "We're not done yet." The battlefield disappeared behind them, swallowed by smoke and shadow, as Elena carried the alien warrior toward the unknown. The abandoned outpost stood on the edge of a jagged canyon, a relic of a time when Zephyra was considered a valuable staging ground. Its reinforced walls were pitted and scarred from battles long past, its solar panels shattered and lifeless. Still, it was shelter, and for Corporal Elena Maris, it was the only hope for keeping both herself and the wounded Krylox warrior alive. Elena kicked open the door, her shoulder aching from the weight of Varshul, the alien warrior she had inexplicably decided to save. His paralyzed lower body made him a dead weight, but she'd refused to leave him behind. Setting him down gently on a rusted medical cot, she finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. Varshul's yellow eyes flickered open. "This place," he rasped, his voice weak but still carrying a guttural strength. "An outpost," Elena replied, brushing her sweat-soaked hair back. "Old Alliance base. Looks abandoned. We'll be safe here for now." The Krylox warrior shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "Safe," he repeated, his mandibles clicking in what Elena had begun to recognize as skepticism. "From your own kind?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She rummaged through the remains of the outpost storage, finding a dusty but intact first aid kit. The supplies were basic but better than nothing. Kneeling beside Varshul, she began to clean his wounds more thoroughly. His ichor-coated exoskeleton felt strange under her gloved hands, cool to the touch, almost metallic. "You're lucky," she said, her tone half-joking. "Most Krylox don't get this kind of care package from an Alliance soldier." Varshul let out a low, rumbling sound. "Luck," he said, pausing for breath. "Or madness." "Probably both," she admitted. "Hold still." He winced but complied as she worked. Silence settled between them, broken only by the occasional whir of malfunctioning equipment and the distant howling of Zephyr's acidic winds. After a while, Varshul spoke again. "Why did you not kill me?" His voice was steadier now, though still hoarse. Elena hesitated. She didn't have a clear answer. "Because..." she started, then trailed off. "Because it didn't feel right." "Not right?" His mandibles twitched. "I am your enemy. You would be honored for killing me." "Maybe," Elena said, securing the final bandage. "But I don't care about honors. I've seen enough death today. If I can stop one more, I will." Varshul studied her, his expression inscrutable. For a moment, Elena thought he might argue, but instead, he closed his eyes and let out a tired sigh. The hours passed slowly. Elena explored the outpost, salvaging what she could. A half-functional generator provided intermittent power, enough to activate basic lighting and a rudimentary heating system. She found some rations unappetizing but edible and returned to find Varshul attempting to prop himself up on his arms. "You're going to tear your stitches," she scolded, rushing to his side. "I cannot stay like this," he growled, frustration seeping into his voice. "I must move." "You're paralyzed," she said bluntly. "At least for now. Until we figure out something better, you need to rest." He growled something in his native tongue, a series of harsh clicks and hisses that her translator implant struggled to decipher. She ignored it and sat down across from him, offering him a water pouch. Reluctantly, he accepted, sipping the liquid through a small tube near his mandibles. After a moment, he spoke again. "You risk your life for me." "But why?" Elena leaned back against the wall, staring at the flickering light above them. "Because I don't think you're my enemy," she said finally. "Not really." Varshul's mandibles twitched, a gesture Elena was beginning to associate with curiosity. You fight the Krylox. You kill my kind. Yet now you say, we are not enemies? I didn't say all humans and Krylox aren't enemies, she clarified. But you are not trying to kill me right now. And I'm not trying to kill you. That's a start. Varshul considered her words in silence. Finally, he said, you are different. Elena snorted. That's one way to put it. As the hours turned into a full cycle of Zephyr's twin sons, their uneasy truce began to grow into something resembling camaraderie. Varshul, despite his injuries, proved to be a surprisingly quick study. Using an old Alliance datapad Elena found in the outpost, he began to learn her language. His own native tongue was far more complex, relying on tonal shifts and clicks that Elena struggled to mimic, but they managed to establish a basic understanding. Through their halting conversations, Elena learned more about the Krylox. Varshul was a captain, a respected warrior who had fought not out of hatred but out of duty. He revealed that many Krylox soldiers shared his doubts about the war, seeing it as a political game played by leaders who cared little for the lives they gambled. What about you? Varshul asked one evening, his voice stronger than it had been. Why do you fight? Elena looked away, her gaze fixed on the horizon outside the outpost's window. I used to believe it was for something noble, she admitted. Protecting humanity, defending our colonies. But now, it feels like I'm just following orders. Killing because someone tells me to. Varshul nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. We are not so different. For the first time, Elena felt a spark of hope. In the middle of this war-torn wasteland, amidst the endless cycle of violence, she and Varshul had found something rare, understanding. But as the faint sound of distant engines echoed through the outpost, that fragile peace felt dangerously close to shattering. Their respective forces were searching for survivors and they were running out of time. The low rumble of engines reverberated through the walls of the outpost, jolting Elena and Varshul from their uneasy rest. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the rhythmic thrum of troop transports cutting through Zephyr's toxic atmosphere. They're coming, Elena muttered, her voice tense. Varshul tried to sit upright, his upper body trembling with the effort. Your forces? Or mine? Does it matter? Elena snapped, pacing the room. Either way, they'll kill us both. We need to act fast. Varshul's mandibles clicked softly, a gesture Elena had come to recognize as contemplation. You speak of us as allies, he said slowly. But we are still enemies in the eyes of our people. Elena stopped pacing and turned to face him. I don't care what they think. Right now, it's us against them. And if we don't come up with something, we're both dead. They spent the next hour devising a plan, though the urgency of the situation left little room for perfection. The goal was simple, to fool both Krylox and Alliance forces into believing Varshul was dead, giving them a chance to escape Zephyr unnoticed. Elena scavenged through the outpost's supplies, finding a small cache of incendiary charges. She set them near the shattered remnants of an old surveillance drone, rigging the devices to create a convincing explosion. Meanwhile, Varshul coached her on how to mimic Krylox battle wounds, using the ichor already staining his armor to create the illusion of fatal injuries. Make it look real, he instructed, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. They must not doubt. I got it, Elena replied, smearing the blue ichor across his torso and upper arms. It felt grotesque, like painting a corpse, but she steeled herself. This will have to do. With the scene prepared, they dragged Varshul to the center of the room and positioned him beneath a large metal beam that had fallen from the ceiling. Elena bent down to check his breathing, her eyes searching his for any sign of hesitation. You're sure about this? She asked. Varshul gave a slow nod. If it fails, we die. If it succeeds, we live. That is all that matters. Elena bit her lip and stepped back, activating the incendiary charges. The faint hiss of the timer sent a shiver down her spine. The explosion rocked the outpost moments after Elena took cover behind a nearby ridge. She peeked over the edge to see plumes of black smoke rising from the ruins, the smell of scorched metal and sulfur filling the air. The Krylox warrior lay motionless amid the debris, his body framed perfectly by the destruction. The engines grew louder, and soon 2 dropships arrived, one Alliance, the other Krylox. Elena ducked lower, her heart pounding as troops from both sides disembarked. The soldiers moved cautiously, their weapons raised, scanning the wreckage for threats. The Krylox team reached Varshul first. They hesitated, clearly recognizing him. Their leader, a smaller but no less imposing Krylox, stepped forward and knelt beside him. After a brief examination, he clicked a series of words in their native tongue. Elena's translator provided the grim verdict: he is dead. The Alliance must have done this. The soldiers murmured among themselves, grief and anger etched into their movements. They retrieved a few pieces of armor from Varshul's body tokens to carry back to their leaders before retreating to their dropship. Elena held her breath as the Alliance team moved in. A lieutenant scanned the scene with a handheld device, his expression unreadable. "Looks like a Krylox officer went down here," he said to his team. "No survivors. Move out." Within minutes, both dropships were gone, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Elena scrambled back to the outpost, her heart racing. She found Varshul exactly where she'd left him, alive but unconscious from the stress of the ordeal. His breathing was shallow, but steady. "Hey," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. It worked. They bought it. Varshul's eyes fluttered open, and he gave a faint nod. "Good," he rasped. "Now, we leave." Their escape was far from over. Using a salvaged reconnaissance vehicle Elena had found earlier, they prepared to leave the moon. The vehicle, a small hovercraft with limited power, would be just enough to get them to a neutral zone where neither side had significant influence. As they loaded supplies, Varshul turned to Elena. "You risked much," he said. "More than any warrior I have known." Elena shrugged, tightening a strap on her pack. "Guess I'm just full of bad ideas." Varshul's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. Bad, but effective. With the vehicle humming to life, they climbed aboard. The horizon stretched before them, a barren expanse of rock and ash, but for the first time, it felt like a path to something greater, a chance at freedom. As they sped away from the ruins of the outpost, Elena glanced at Varshul. "We made it this far," she said. "Let's hope our luck holds." "It will," Varshul replied, his voice carrying a quiet conviction. "Together, we are stronger than they know." Elena smiled faintly and turned her gaze back to the horizon, the promise of a new beginning guiding their way forward. The barren landscape of Zephyr stretched endlessly as Elena and Varshul piloted the salvaged reconnaissance vehicle across its jagged terrain. The vehicle's engines whined in protest, barely holding together after years of neglect. Every bump in the road sent jolts through Elena's aching body, but she pressed on, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Varshul, propped awkwardly in the passenger seat, remained silent, his yellow eyes fixed on the shifting terrain ahead. His injuries were severe, and despite Elena's patchwork medical care, she knew he was running on sheer willpower. "You holding up over there?" she asked, glancing at him. He turned his head slightly, his mandibles clicking in a weary rhythm. "I will endure," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Your concern is unusual for a soldier." Elena shrugged. "Guess I'm not a very good soldier." After several hours of tense travel, the desolation of Zephyr gave way to a series of jagged canyons that marked the planet's outer regions. This was their destination, a neutral zone known as the Outer Settlements, a loosely governed expanse where neither the Alliance nor the Krylox Confederacy held sway. It was a place of smugglers, traders, and outlaws, a perfect hiding spot for 2 fugitives. The vehicle sputtered to a halt as they reached the edge of a canyon. Elena killed the engine and stepped out, surveying the path ahead. A narrow bridge, little more than a rusted metal plank, stretched across the abyss. "This is it," she said. "Once we're across, we're in the clear." Varshul struggled to pull himself upright. "And then what?" Elena hesitated, leaning against the vehicle. "We find a place to lay low. Figure things out. Maybe there's a way to contact someone who cares more about peace than war." Varshul's mandibles twitched. "If such people exist." "They have to," Elena said, more to herself than to him. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" Crossing the bridge proved more difficult than expected. Elena supported Varshul as they inched forward, each step a test of balance and patience. The wind howled through the canyon, threatening to knock them into the abyss. Halfway across, the distant roar of engines shattered the fragile silence. Elena froze, her heart pounding. She turned to see two Alliance hovercrafts approaching rapidly from the west. The vehicles were sleek and deadly, bristling with weaponry. "They found us," she muttered, gripping Varshul's arm tighter. Varshul let out a low growl. "Go. Leave me." "Not a chance," Elena shot back. She scanned the terrain, her mind racing. They were exposed on the bridge, with no cover and nowhere to run. As the hovercrafts drew closer, a familiar whine filled the air, the sound of a Krylox dropship. It appeared from the east, its massive silhouette blotting out the sun. The dropship's guns swiveled toward the approaching Alliance vehicles, unleashing a barrage of plasma fire. "Looks like we're not the only ones being hunted," Elena muttered. The resulting firefight was chaotic and violent. The bridge trembled under the force of explosions, and Elena tightened her grip on Varshul, dragging him forward as fast as she could. By some miracle, they reached the other side of the canyon just as the battle behind them reached its peak. Elena helped Varshul into the shadows of a rocky overhang, both of them gasping for breath. The sound of gunfire and explosions faded into the distance, swallowed by the vastness of the canyon. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their survival sinking in. "You did not leave," Varshul said finally, his voice filled with something between disbelief and gratitude. Elena smirked weakly. "Told you. I'm not a very good soldier." Varshul's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. "You are more than a soldier." They resumed their journey on foot, the ruined vehicle abandoned on the canyon's edge. The outer settlements loomed ahead, a collection of ramshackle structures clustered around a shimmering oasis. The settlement was bustling with activity, aliens and humans alike bartering, repairing ships, and exchanging news from across the galaxy. Elena felt a pang of unease as they entered. The settlements were known for their neutrality, but trust was a rare commodity in a place like this. "We'll blend in," she said to Varshul. "Find a place to rest. Keep a low profile." They secured lodging in a small, dimly lit and run by a grizzled alien who didn't ask questions. The room was sparse but clean, and for the first time in days, Elena felt a semblance of safety. As the days turned into weeks, Elena and Varshul began to rebuild their lives. Varshul's injuries slowly healed, though his paralysis remained. Using a crude exoskeleton crafted by a local mechanic, he regained some mobility. Meanwhile, Elena found work as a courier, ferrying messages and supplies between the settlement's far-flung outposts. Their story spread quietly among the settlers, an Alliance soldier and a Krylox warrior working together to survive. It became a symbol of hope, proof that even in the midst of war, understanding and compassion were possible. One evening, as they sat in the inn's common room, Varshul turned to Elena. "We cannot remain here forever," he said. "The war will find us, even here." Elena nodded. "I know. But maybe we can do something about it." Varshul tilted his head. "You believe we can change all this?" Elena smiled faintly. "We've already started. Together, They began to reach out, using the settlements as a base to gather like-minded individuals, humans and Kryloks who were tired of the endless cycle of violence. Their efforts were small at first, but as the months passed, they gained momentum. In time, their work grew into something greater than either of them had imagined. Their bond, forged in the crucible of war, became a beacon of hope for a galaxy in desperate need of peace. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, they faced it together, knowing that their unlikely alliance had already changed the course of history.